I didn't know my life was about to change the moment I turned the key in my own front door. At first, it was just a smell, sweet alcohol mixed with something sour. Then the silence felt wrong. My apartment never sounded like that. Too hollow, too lived in. I stood there, my bag still hanging from my shoulder, and felt my stomach tighten before my brain could catch up. There were empty bottles on my kitchen counter. My couch had been pushed several inches out of place. Dark stains marked the carpet like bruises I didn't remember earning. And when I walked into my bedroom, my breath stopped. Someone had slept in my bed. The sheets were wrinkled in a way that wasn't mine. One pillow had a faint smear of makeup near the edge. Not mine. I don't wear makeup to sleep. My chest went tight, like the room itself was pressing in on me. I stood there, frozen, thinking the same thought over and over. She promised me the power was out. That was when I knew, without a doubt, that the lie wasn't small, and it wasn't new. For over a year, my stepmother had been asking me for money. Just little amounts, she said. Temporary help. Family helping family. She didn't pay rent. The house my father had paid off was hers. She had a full-time job. Her daughter worked too. Still, the requests kept coming. And I kept saying yes, because my father was gone. Because grief makes you generous in ways that aren't healthy. Because I didn't realize that every boundary I failed to protect was being carefully measured and slowly crossed. Standing there in my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of a party I hadn't agreed to, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not yet. Clarity. This wasn't about electricity. It wasn't about a weekend favor. It wasn't even about money. It was about entitlement. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. I had no idea that a copied house key, a public confrontation, and a room full of relatives staring at me would soon force me to choose between being nice and being safe. And once I chose, there would be no going back. My name is Claire Hart, and I was 29 years old when I finally understood something I should have learned much earlier. Losing a parent doesn't end when the funeral does. Sometimes it starts there. I lost my mother when I was 3. People tell you that at 3, you don't remember much. And they're right. I don't have a clear picture of her face the way other people do. I don't remember the exact sound of her voice. I have no memory of her holding my hand, braiding my hair, whispering goodnight. What I do have are fragments, stories my father told me, small details my grandparents repeated like prayers. That she got sick for about a year before she died, that she tried to be brave when she couldn't stand anymore, that she loved me fiercely, even when her body didn't cooperate. And then she was gone. After that, it was just my dad and me. His name was Michael Hart, and he wasn't the kind of man who used big words about emotion. He didn't sit me down and tell me how broken he felt. He didn't talk about loneliness like it was an illness. He just showed up. He worked long hours at an engineering firm, the kind of job that eats daylight and leaves you with a tie loosened, eyes tired, and a mind still trapped in deadlines. But every night he was home, we ate dinner together. No TV, no phones, just the two of us at the table, my feet swinging under the chair because I was too small to reach the floor. He'd ask about school. He'd listen, really listen. And even when he was exhausted, he still showed up for my events. Spelling bees, choir concerts, science fairs, the tiny stages that make children feel seen. And when he couldn't pick me up from school, my grandparents did. They lived 2 streets away, close enough that their house felt like an extension of mine. My grandmother kept snacks in the same cabinet every time, like it was a ritual. My grandfather always had the news on low volume, but he'd mute it the second I walked in. Most weekends, I slept in the guest room at their place, and my grandmother would fold the blanket back in the morning like I was still 5, even when I was 15 and pretending I didn't need it anymore. They were my safety net. And my dad? He stayed single for a long time. Not because no one wanted him. He was stable, hardworking, kind, but he seemed careful. Like he knew that the wrong person could change the entire gravity of a home. So when he finally told me, when I was 16, that he was dating someone, I tried to be mature about it. I told myself, "You're almost grown. You'll be leaving for college soon. Don't make this hard for him." Her name was Diane Parker. She was 44 then, and she worked in HR at the same company where my dad was a project manager. She had a daughter from her first marriage, Maya Parker, 13 at the time. Diane and her ex-husband had been divorced for around 5 years. When my dad introduced us, Diane smiled like she'd practiced in a mirror. Warm, polished, the kind of smile people trust because it looks like stability. "Claire, I've heard so much about you," she said, voice smooth, eyes scanning my face like she was collecting information. "Your dad talks about you all the time." I remember nodding, polite, careful. Maya stood slightly behind her mother, shoulders hunched, eyes down. Quiet. Not rude, just withdrawn. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The early months were fine. My dad seemed happier, lighter, like someone had opened a window in a room he didn't realize was stale. Diane came over for dinner sometimes. She brought dessert. She asked me about school. She offered to cook. And I accepted it the way you accept a new neighbor. With manners, with distance. After about 8 months of dating, Diane and Maya moved into our house. Our house had 4 bedrooms, so no one had to share space. That helped. It kept things from feeling crowded, even when the energy shifted. But still, something changed the moment their boxes came in. Not because they were loud or messy, they weren't. It was subtler than that. Like suddenly there were new rules in the air, unspoken ones. Diane tried to act like we were building something together. She'd say things like, "We'll make this work as a family. We're all under one roof now. Your dad and I want to create a home." But it didn't feel like a family. It felt like roommates. I stayed polite. I said thank you when she cooked. I smiled at Maya in the hallway. I didn't slam doors. I didn't create drama. Because I was 17. Because I was already planning my escape. I had been accepted to a state university 3 hours away, and I was leaving in less than a year. My life was pointed forward like an arrow. And my grandparents noticed things, even when they didn't say them directly. My grandmother made one comment, quiet but sharp, while folding napkins at the kitchen table. "It all happened fast," she murmured. Not accusing, not cruel, just wary. I shrugged like it didn't matter. But deep down I felt it too. 3 months after Diane and Maya moved in, I left for college. I came home for holidays, summer breaks, the occasional weekend when I missed my grandparents' backyard or the familiarity of my old room. But most of the time, I avoided being in that house longer than necessary. Diane would invite me to family dinners. "Come eat with us, Claire," she'd say, cheerful. "Your dad would love it." And I'd smile and answer lightly, "I already have plans." Sometimes those plans were real. Old friends from high school, a shift at a part-time job, study sessions. And sometimes my plan was simply not being there. My dad never pushed. I think he understood I was nearly an adult. I had my own life, and maybe part of him also understood that the connection between me and Diane wasn't natural. It was something he wanted to be true. But wanting doesn't make it real. After graduation, I got a job in the same city and rented a small 1-bedroom apartment. Not fancy, just mine. I visited my dad every few weeks. I showed up for his birthday dinners, their anniversary meals, the occasional holiday gathering. Diane stayed pleasant, always pleasant. But we didn't talk about anything real. She'd ask surface questions, work, weather, traffic. She'd compliment my outfit. She'd talk about her job in HR. And Maya? Maya was older by then, always on her phone, headphones in, living in her own world. We existed in the same spaces, but we weren't close. And I thought that was fine. I thought the story would stay like that, neutral, quiet, manageable. Until 3 years ago. My dad died suddenly from a heart attack at 52, at work, with no warning, gone before the ambulance even arrived. Diane was the one who called me. And the sound of her voice that day, tight, trembling, still haunts me, because it wasn't just grief in it. It was something else, too. Something I didn't recognize at the time. But later, I would understand exactly what it was. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves, some soft enough to breathe through, others sharp enough to knock the air out of your lungs when you least expect it. The day my father died, I drove to the hospital on instinct. My hands shaking so badly, I had to pull over once just to breathe. By the time I arrived, he was already gone. A doctor spoke to me in that careful, rehearsed tone people use when they don't know how to say the words without breaking something inside you. I remember nodding. I remember signing papers. I remember thinking, this can't be real. At the funeral, the church was full. My father had worked at the same firm for years. He mentored younger engineers. He was the kind of man people trusted without needing to be loud about it. Colleagues came in dark suits. Old friends hugged me too tightly. People told me how good he was, how steady, how kind. Diane cried through the entire service. Not quiet tears. Deep, dramatic sobs that made people turn their heads in sympathy. Maya sat next to her, pale, silent, eyes fixed on the floor. My grandparents sat with me in the front row, one hand on each of mine like anchors. After the service, Diane hugged me hard. "We should stay close," she whispered into my hair. We both loved him. I nodded, because that's what you do when someone says something you can't disagree with. even if you don't fully believe it. For the first few months after the funeral, Diane called me every week. At first, I thought it was grief. She talked about how empty the house felt, how she couldn't sleep in their bed, how everything reminded her of him. She invited me over for dinner. I went, because I thought it was the right thing to do. She cooked elaborate meals, more effort than she'd ever put in when my dad was alive. She set the table carefully, lit candles, played soft music in the background. She talked about memories of my father, stories from work, vacations I wasn't part of, moments she framed like proof of how close they'd been. And I listened. Maya sat at the table, scrolling on her phone, occasionally nodding, rarely speaking. I noticed something then, something small, but persistent. Diane often mentioned how much my dad had provided for them, how lucky Maya was to have him, how grateful she was for the life he gave her, how hard it was to adjust now that he was gone. At first, it sounded like appreciation. Later, it felt like positioning. About 6 months after my dad died, Diane asked me for a favor. Just one. She needed someone to watch her dog for a weekend while she visited her sister in another state. I said yes. It seemed harmless. Then she asked if I could help her pick up some furniture she'd ordered. Renovations, she explained. Updating the house, making it feel less heavy. I drove her to the store, helped load boxes into a rental truck, carried things inside. She talked the entire time about paint colors, countertops, plans. I didn't think much of it. A month later, she called again. This time her voice was hesitant, careful. She said the renovation had gone over budget, that things were more expensive than she'd expected, that she was stressed. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. She mentioned my father's will. She reminded me, gently, that he'd left me a larger portion of his savings. 60% to me, 40% to her. The house? Paid off. Fully hers. He would have wanted us to help each other, she said softly. You know that. I didn't like the way it felt. But she wasn't wrong about the inheritance. And grief has a way of making you doubt your right to say no. So I agreed to give her $5,000. She thanked me like I'd done something noble. 2 months later, she called again. This time, she said the renovations were taking longer than expected, that she and Maya needed somewhere to stay for a few weeks. She asked if they could stay at my apartment. I stared at the wall while she talked. My apartment was 1 bedroom. Small. Tight. I told her I didn't have the space. She sounded disappointed, but she said she understood. She mentioned they'd probably stay with her parents. After that call, something changed. Diane started calling more often. Not for conversation. For help. $200 here, $400 there. Car repairs. Textbooks for Maya's college classes. Each request was small enough to justify. But together, they formed a pattern. Diane had a full-time job in HR. No rent. No mortgage. Maya worked part-time. They weren't struggling the way she framed it. And yet, my money kept filling gaps I couldn't see. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. I just sent the money. Because confrontation felt too heavy. Because grief hadn't fully settled yet. Because I didn't want to believe what my instincts were whispering. Then, about a year after my dad died, I mentioned, casually, that I was taking a weekend trip with friends. A beach town, 4 hours away, nothing fancy. 2 days before I left, Diane called. She said there was going to be a planned power outage in her neighborhood for the entire weekend, that the utility company had sent a notice, that she didn't feel safe staying in the house without electricity. She asked if she and Maya could stay at my apartment while I was gone. I hesitated. Then I said yes, because I thought I was being reasonable, because I didn't know I was handing her the last piece of access she needed. I came home late Sunday evening. The sky was already dark, the kind of quiet that settles into a neighborhood when everyone's weekend has ended and Monday is waiting just around the corner. I remember feeling tired but light, sunburned, relaxed, my head still full of laughter and ocean air. That feeling lasted exactly 3 seconds. The moment I unlocked my apartment door, something felt wrong. Not loud wrong, not obvious. Just off. There was a smell that didn't belong to me. Alcohol, faint but stale, mixed with perfume I didn't own. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me, my bag slipping from my shoulder to the floor. The living room looked rearranged. My couch was pushed forward slightly, like someone had tried to make more space. The coffee table had a ring at one corner, sticky to the touch. Empty bottles stood on the kitchen counter. Cheap liquor, the kind I never bought. My heartbeat slowed in a strange way, like my body was bracing before my mind caught up. I walked further in. The carpet had stains, dark ones, fresh. Then I opened my bedroom door. The bed had been used. Not slept in the way you nap used. Not accidentally sat on used. Used. The sheets were wrinkled, pulled back unevenly. One pillow had a faint beige smear near the edge. Foundation. I don't wear makeup to bed. I stood there staring, my chest tightening, my hands cold. Someone had been in my space. I moved mechanically after that. Bathroom first. Towels on the floor. Trash overflowing. Makeup wipes in the bin that weren't mine. Back to the kitchen. That's when I saw the note on the refrigerator. It was written in looping, careless handwriting. Sorry about the mess. We had a few friends over Saturday night. We didn't have time to clean everything before leaving early this morning. Hope that's okay. Maya. A smiley face. I stood there holding the edge of the counter, rereading it until the words blurred. Friends. Plural. In my apartment. I pulled my phone out and called an old neighbor of Diane's, someone who still lived on her street. We'd stayed loosely in touch over the years. Hey, I said, keeping my voice even. Quick question. Was there a power outage this weekend? She didn't hesitate. No, she said. Why? I swallowed. No notice? Nothing planned? Nothing at all, she replied. Why? I thanked her and hung up. The lie settled into my chest like a stone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call Diane. I cleaned. For 3 hours. I scrubbed stains out of the carpet until my back ached. I washed every sheet, every pillowcase. I wiped down surfaces I didn't even know had been touched. I found cigarette ash on my balcony, even though I had a strict no smoking rule. When everything was finally clean, I sat on my couch and stared at the wall, and something inside me went quiet. Not numb. Resolved. I stopped accepting Diane's dinner invitations after that. I stopped answering calls quickly. When she asked for money, I started saying no. I have my own expenses now, I said calmly. She noticed. At a family barbecue months later, she pulled me aside. Are you upset with me? She asked, eyes searching my face. I've just been busy, I said. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. Neither did my dad's family. My grandfather asked once if everything was okay. I told him Diane and I didn't have much in common. He nodded. Then, last year, I got a promotion. A real one, with a significant raise. I'd been saving quietly, carefully, and for the first time in my life, I bought something big. A house, 3 bedrooms, quiet neighborhood, mine. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because Diane wasn't done crossing lines. She was just getting bolder. Buying that house felt like reclaiming oxygen. For years, I'd lived carefully, saving, budgeting, telling myself I'd make the big moves later. The promotion changed that. Suddenly, the future didn't feel hypothetical anymore. It felt reachable. The house wasn't perfect. The paint was dated. The floors creaked in places. One of the bedrooms smelled faintly like old carpet and dust. But it was structurally solid, within my budget, and, most importantly, it was mine. I closed in March. I spent the next month painting walls, fixing small things, learning where the light hit in the mornings. Every improvement felt personal, earned. This was the first major thing I'd bought entirely on my own. So when I planned a small housewarming party in April, I kept it modest. My grandparents, a few cousins, some coworkers. I invited Diane and Maya too, not because I wanted them there, but because I knew not inviting them would become a problem. The party started easy. My grandmother brought a casserole. My grandfather helped set up chairs in the backyard. Laughter drifted through the house. For a few hours, everything felt normal. Then Diane arrived. She was loud in a way that demanded attention. She brought a plant and walked through the house, commenting on my paint choices, my furniture, my layout, like she'd had a hand in all of it. She made sure everyone heard her. I'm so proud of her, she said more than once. This is what family does for each other. My jaw tightened every time she said it. Halfway through the party, she stood in the kitchen with my cousins, telling a story about how she'd helped me pick out furniture. She hadn't. Then she reached into her purse. Pulled out a key. I made a copy of Claire's house key, she announced, smiling, so I can drop by whenever I want. The room went silent. She laughed lightly, explaining how she'd found the spare key under my doormat weeks ago when she dropped off mail that had been delivered to her house by mistake. She'd copied it, put the original back. I stood there holding a plate of food, every eye in the room on me, and I smiled. I said, that's fine. Not because it was fine, but because I refused to make a scene in my own home. Diane looked pleased. She talked about decorating the extra bedrooms, planting flowers, staying over for days at a time. I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom. I stared at my reflection, breathing slowly, grounding myself. The party ended around 6. Diane hugged me before leaving. I'll probably stop by sometime this week, she said. The next morning, I went to the hardware store. I bought new locks. I spent the entire afternoon installing them myself. Every turn of the screwdriver felt like reclaiming something I'd let go of too easily before. 3 weeks later, at my cousin Margie's baby shower, Diane confronted me. Her key didn't work. She demanded to know why. She raised her voice. She cried. She said my dad would be ashamed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't soften the truth. I told her she was never my mother. I told her she'd crossed boundaries. I told her about the money, about the apartment, about the lie. When she collapsed into a chair, clutching her chest, the room turned against me. I picked up my purse and walked out. And that's when the real pressure began. The silence after I walked out of the restaurant was heavier than the confrontation itself. I sat in my car in this parking lot for nearly 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, my heartbeat loud in my ears. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I just felt hollow, like something final had happened and my body hadn't caught up yet. Then my phone started buzzing. Text after text, call after call. I didn't answer any of them. That night, I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter and tried to sleep. I failed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Diane's face, tearful, accusing, heard her voice telling me my father would be ashamed. By morning, the messages had multiplied. Relatives I barely spoke to suddenly had strong opinions. Older aunts, distant uncles, people who hadn't checked on me once after my dad died were now invested in correcting my behavior. You humiliated her. She was only trying to help. Family sticks together. You owe her an apology. One aunt said I was cruel. Another said I was selfish. Someone else said I was disrespectful to a woman who had taken care of me. No one asked what actually happened. They already had their version. Margie called 2 days later. She apologized for the scene at her baby shower and told me she hadn't meant for it to turn into family drama. She said Diane had called her the next day, crying, saying I'd rejected her as family. Margie didn't take sides, but her discomfort was clear. The only people who truly listened were my grandparents. My grandfather called me the evening after the shower. His voice was calm, steady. Tell me what happened, he said. So I did. I told him everything. The money requests, the apartment party, the lie, the copied key. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. I suspected she was taking advantage of you, he said finally. I just didn't want to interfere. He told me I had every right to set boundaries, that he was proud of me. My grandmother called the next day. She told me Diane had called her too, asking her to talk some sense into me. I told her I wasn't getting involved, my grandmother said. She didn't like that. Then Diane took things public. She posted a photo of us together on Facebook, an old picture from my dad's birthday dinner years earlier. We were smiling. The caption talked about betrayal, about children forgetting where they came from, about heartbreak. People commented, sympathized, asked questions. I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, Maya texted me. She accused me of being selfish, immature, said my father would be disappointed. I replied once. I told her Diane was not my mother. She was not my sister. We were never a family. Then I blocked them both. After that, Diane showed up unannounced at my grandparents' house, crying, claiming she was worried about me, implying I was unstable. My grandfather made her leave. Maya cornered me at a grocery store weeks later, raised her voice, followed me to my car. I told her I'd call the police if she didn't leave me alone. That night, I contacted a lawyer, not for revenge, for protection. And that's when I realized this wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It was about control. For the first time since my father died, I felt truly alone. Not in the dramatic sense. There were people in my life, calls I could make, places I could go. But emotionally, I was standing in the middle of something that felt bigger than grief and sharper than anger. It was the feeling of being misunderstood on purpose. After I blocked Diane and Maya, the noise didn't stop. It just changed shape. It came through other people. Relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly felt entitled to judge my character. Family group chats grew quiet whenever my name came up. Invitations stopped coming, not officially, but subtly. The absence itself said enough. I'd lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, replaying the baby shower over and over. Should I have stayed calm? Should I have walked away sooner? Did I say too much? Grief has a way of making you second-guess your right to protect yourself. What hurt the most wasn't Diane's behavior. I'd already accepted that she saw me as a resource, not a person. What hurt was watching people believe her without hesitation. People who knew my father, people who knew how he raised me, people who benefited from his kindness. They chose the easier story, the one where I was cold, ungrateful, difficult. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home and sat on the floor of my living room instead of turning on the lights. I stayed there for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house. This house I'd worked so hard for, this space that was supposed to feel safe. I checked my phone out of habit. Another message, this time from an older cousin I barely spoke to. You could have handled it better. I put the phone down and felt something break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean internal snap. I realized then that no explanation I gave would ever be enough for people who didn't want the truth. And that realization was devastating. I cried that night for the first time since the confrontation. Not sobbing, just quiet tears that slid down my temples into my hair. Tears for my father, for the illusion of family, for the version of myself that used to believe kindness would be returned fairly. The next day, I opened the document my lawyer had suggested I keep. I started writing everything down. Dates, times, messages, encounters. Not because I wanted to escalate things, but because I needed to see the pattern clearly, without emotion clouding it. And as I wrote, something shifted. The story wasn't about cruelty. It was about boundaries. And for the first time since this began, I stopped wondering if I was wrong. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic revelation. It came quietly, through consistency, through patterns that no longer required interpretation. Once I started documenting everything, the emotional fog began to lift. Seeing it all laid out, dates, requests, lies, confrontations, removed the doubt I'd been carrying like a second skin. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't grief-fueled chaos. It was sustained behavior. A month after I blocked Diane and Maya, things went quiet. Too quiet. I allowed myself to hope it was over. Then my grandfather called. His voice was careful. Diane came by yesterday, he said, unannounced. She'd shown up at their house in the afternoon, crying, saying she was worried about me. She told them I'd been acting erratically, that she thought I might be having a breakdown. She asked if they'd noticed anything concerning. My hands went cold as he spoke. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about control, reframed as concern. My grandfather told her I was fine, that she needed to leave. My grandmother had to repeat it twice before Diane finally went. That night I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I updated my document. 2 weeks later, I ran into Maya at the grocery store. We made eye contact in the produce aisle. I turned away immediately, heading for the checkout. She followed me, her footsteps quick, insistent. We need to talk, she said. I have nothing to say to you, I replied. She raised her voice, accused me of ruining her mother's relationship with the family, said Diane had been depressed since the baby shower, because of me. The cashier looked uncomfortable. I paid, walked out, and she followed me into the parking lot. She stood by my car, blocking the door. That was the moment I felt fear. Not emotional fear, but physical, real. I told her I would call the police if she didn't step away. She did. I drove home shaking. The next day, I contacted a lawyer again. She told me I didn't yet have enough for a restraining order, but I was close. She advised me to keep documenting, to save messages, to log encounters. So I did. Then came Margie's call. She was hosting a small gathering to meet her newborn and wanted me there. She promised Diane wouldn't be allowed to corner me. She meant it. When Diane tried anyway, when she called me childish and demanded we clear the air, Margie stepped in. She took Diane outside. I watched through the window as Margie stood firm, arms crossed, shaking her head. 5 minutes later, Diane left. That was the first time someone else publicly chose boundaries over appeasement, and it mattered more than I expected. From then on, the narrative began to shift. Quietly, relatives stopped pressing me. Some avoided the topic entirely. A few, carefully, asked what had really happened. I didn't argue. I didn't campaign. I let consistency speak. I installed security cameras, changed my routines, built a life that didn't include chaos. And for the first time in years, I slept deeply. Because the truth didn't need defending anymore. It just needed time. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They never do. They came in pieces. Quiet shifts in tone, small changes in behavior, conversations I wasn't invited into, but could still feel happening without me. By late summer, Diane stopped showing up to family events. At first, people made excuses for her. She was busy. She needed space. She was still grieving. But eventually, the excuses ran out. She'd made one too many vague Facebook posts about betrayal and loyalty, one too many phone calls asking relatives to help her talk some sense into me, one too many attempts to paint herself as the wounded party while refusing to acknowledge boundaries. People started noticing patterns. My Aunt Belinda was the first to say something out loud, to me at least. She called in late August, her tone hesitant. I had lunch with Diane, she said. Some things didn't add up. She asked what had happened between us. I didn't vent. I didn't dramatize. I gave her facts. The money requests. The apartment lie. The copied key. There was a long silence on the line. Then she apologized for the messages she'd sent me after the baby shower. She admitted something else, too. Diane had recently asked her for a loan. That was when I knew the truth was fully catching up. In September, I installed a full security system. Front door, back door, doorbell camera. My grandfather helped me set it up. He said it made him feel better knowing I was protected. Diane never showed up again. No letters, no surprise visits, no confrontations through other people. Her story had lost its audience. Meanwhile, my life became quieter, healthier. I focused on work, on fixing up my house. I turned the third bedroom into a home office, bought a proper desk, shelves for books I actually wanted to read. I took a solo trip up the coast. Just me, a small bed and breakfast, long walks along the beach. I didn't tell anyone except my grandparents where I was going. And nothing happened. No emergencies, no guilt calls, no demands. When I came home, my house felt exactly how I'd always wanted it to feel. Safe. Diane's absence became permanent, not because I forced it, but because people stopped enabling her. She'd overplayed her hand. And I didn't need to lift a finger. It's November now. 3 months have passed since I last heard Diane's name spoken with urgency. No messages, no confrontations, no attempts to pull me back into a story that was never mine to carry. My house is quiet in the best way. The locks work perfectly. The security cameras light up my phone only when someone I expect approaches the door. I sleep through the night without bracing myself for a knock, a call, a demand disguised as concern. My grandparents come over for dinner once a month. We sit at the table the way we always have, easy, warm, unforced. Sometimes my younger cousins come over for game nights, laughing too loud, making a mess I don't mind cleaning. These are the relationships I choose now. I still think about my father. I wonder what he would say if he were here, if he'd be disappointed in how things ended or proud of how I handled them. But then I remember the man who raised me, the one who taught me to work hard, to be fair, to stand up for myself quietly without cruelty. He never would have wanted me to be taken advantage of by anyone, not even someone he once loved. Some relatives still think I should have handled things differently, that I should have been softer, more accommodating, less firm. But their opinions don't live in my house. I've learned that boundaries make some people deeply uncomfortable, especially those who benefited from you having none. That discomfort isn't my responsibility. The truth is simple. I didn't lose a family. I lost access to people who mistook my kindness for permission. And when I locked my doors, changed my habits, and chose peace, I didn't become cold. I became safe. And sometimes that's the strongest ending there is.